Not everyone is aligned with the creator in terms of truth and goodness and beauty, but that capacity to create comes from the creator. And so art is a place where we can encounter the glory of God, where we can encounter creativity that comes from God.
In the first episode of our conversation, we talked about the art of Georges Rouault, an early 20th century French painter. My guest, Dr. Wesley Vander Lugt, discussed Rouault's way of seeing, about the faces he paints and the particular darkness that his work refuses to stay within, but always lead to hope. Well, in this second episode, we are going to take a deliberate turn. We're going to focus on his book that gathers these reflections, called A Prophet in the Darkness, published by University Press Academic. We're going to ponder a broader question that it raises. What does it mean to take art seriously as a form of theological witness? Here at The Collaborative, we care deeply about faith and its witness in the public square, and art is such a great part of that witness. We need to talk about it and to lean in. So this episode is less about description of Rouault's work. If you'd like to hear that and you missed the last episode, maybe hit pause, go listen to that one, pick back up here. Because today is more about discernment, less about lingering with an image and more about asking what kind of faith is formed when we do. So Wes Vander Lugt is a theologian and teacher, editor of this work, A Prophet in the Darkness, and author of quite a number of other works. And he teaches at Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. He earned his PhD from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and serves as an adjunct professor of theology, as well as the acting director of the Leighton Ford Initiative for Theology, the Arts, and Gospel Witness at Gordon-Conwell Seminary. Well, Wes, thanks for being with me again.
Thank you for having me.
So, faith and art, they are seemingly so very different in so many ways, and yet bound together, I believe, and fully think that they are. For somebody who might be new to this conversation as to how and why that faith and art belong together, speak to one another, what would you say?
Oh, there's so many things we could talk about along those lines.
That's 4 episodes.
Yeah, but, at its essence, this conversation is important because human beings are created in the image of a maker to make things. And so artistic creation is what Tolkien called subcreation. It's taking the white light of God's creativity and refracting it through all of the different colors of our creative expressions. And so not everyone is aligned with the creator in terms of truth and goodness and beauty, but that capacity to create comes from the creator. And so art is a place where we can encounter the glory of God, where we can encounter creativity that comes from God. And so it's a ripe area of life for encountering not only what it means to be human, but also really what it means to be created in the image of God and who God is like. I always say that art is worship. So if you want to know what people really care about, what they think is most worthwhile and what they worship, just look at what they're creating.
So good. Well, when I teach the biblical narrative, I dwell on the fact that God is known as creator in Genesis 1 and 2. He's not known like the Egyptian gods were to be a god of fertility or of the river or of the sun, but yet he is a creating God. And if we're in his image, we're little creators. And you may not feel like you're a Picasso or a Rouault, but you do create something, whether it be children or through your work. You create economic value. You provide services of value. So I have to work a little bit to help people see that they are creators.
Yes. Yeah, not everyone is an artist, but everyone is creative. And making that distinction, I think, is really important to show how we all participate in this divine story of creativity.
Now, for your work, I know that you're not only trying to dig into Rouault's life and share his contributions, because as we established last time, he was a very committed believer in Christ, very strong Roman Catholic. But for this particular volume, Why now, and why this project?
Part of it was circumstantial, that we had a symposium based on Rouault's work. We had his work here in the building. I invited a whole bunch of people to engage with his work, not just on the level of the scholarship, but had artists responding to his work, making their own work. And those presentations and the pairing of contemporary artistic responses and scholarly engagements, I thought made a really unique volume. There's not a whole lot out there in terms of learning about Rouault. You've got some biographies, you have articles here or there, some edited volumes. But I wanted to show how Rouault is relevant for today. And part of that is understanding the trajectory of his life and what his art means, but including these artistic examples and statements from contemporary visual artists and poets to say Rouault's art has inspired their own, and this is how. That was an important part of it for me.
Yeah, that is very unique. So there are 9 articles in this book, and after each one, there's an artist who reflects on their particular work. And their work is in the book. So you can meditate and reflect on their work while also reading an article about what they have to say. How did you go about choosing the academicians to write for this volume?
I made a list of everyone who had some expertise on Rouault, and I invited them all. Essentially, no, there were some that I didn't invite because I wanted a good balance of art historians, theologians, and community leaders. So I tried to have a good balance of that, made a couple invitations, and folks were delighted to come because Rouault, one, is not very well known in the broader world, and certainly not in the church, but has so much to offer in terms of his honest vision of reality. And also, I think there is an acknowledgement, there was at least during that symposium, that Rouault provides a certain model for artistic practice today. And that was part of what we wanted to explore as well.
Tell us about that model.
Well, he made art in community. So I think that's really important, that we let go of this false notion of the artist as some isolated genius, just creating work apart from any other forces. And Rouault is deeply embedded within his church community, his friendships, his family, and all of his work. I mean, I think all artwork, but we see it in Rouault is deeply personal. So that's a big part of it. And then how he was able to become, I hesitate to use the word expert, but to become a master at his craft through apprenticeship. So that's important, of submitting to a certain tradition, submitting to mentors before finding your own voice. And then finally, I think Rouault's honesty, his willingness and ability to tell all the truth and tell it slant through his particular form of art making is a really powerful model for how to do that, whatever your artistic medium might be.
So good. Well, speaking of models, in your article in the book, page 139, you give us another paradigm, if you will, to engage art. You speak of Anne Bogart, that she speaks of the power of triads in the creative process. And when it comes to creating the right conditions for resonating with the art you write, I would suggest the triad of availability, perception, and response. Availability, perception, response. Why those three? And talk to us more about those.
Yeah, so just to back up a little bit, I think we can struggle in engaging with visual art these days because there's just so many images in our lives. And when an artist creates something, that it's not that their intention is to create something that they hope will mean something to someone else, will impact them in some way. Well, in order for that to happen, in order for there to be a possibility of that kind of encounter, what I'm calling resonance with a work of art, we first have to take the time necessary to really let that work of art speak to us. So that first part, availability, is simply about showing up and I'm a big fan of Slow Art and Slow Art Day,
You
which
write
I
on
celebrate
that.
every April, which the challenge is to spend 20 minutes with a work of art. Don't go move on to the next thing immediately.
Right.
Don't try to really focus on what is it that you're encountering, and notice, pay attention so that the art can really speak to you. And that can lead to true understanding, what I'm calling perception, which is different than just looking at a work of art. It's what is the artist trying to do? How is he using these particular styles to communicate something? How is it impacting me? How might my conceptual framework or imaginary that I'm bringing to this painting either align with it or clash with it, right? Some of those questions about understanding, and then there can be the appropriate response. But often we start with response of, oh, I don't like that, or that makes me uncomfortable, or, oh, that's really nice, without taking the time to be fully present and taking the time to move slowly through a process of perception and understanding. Those are the kind of conditions that I think really create the possibility of resonating with a work of art so that we can be changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with Lectio Visua?
Yeah. So there's a lot of similarities there for sure.
Well, we're big at the Collaborative on spiritual formation, and that it pairs with anything else that we might do in an academic sense. And Rachel DeGia is a dear friend, and she's on the staff of Crew. And what I do a seminar called Gotham Fellows, and every year I have her come and lead a Lectio Visua experience. And for those that may not be familiar, this is sort of, as Wes is describing, a deep reflection on a particular piece of art. And you're led through a variety of questions and moments for observation. And you come through the whole experience, usually having experienced death, resurrection, and glory. And it's very unique, very different.
Yeah, I might suggest you use Rouault for your next Visio Divina.
Okay.
And perhaps, depending on the season, I could make some suggestions. We did some of that in some of our own chapel services here at the seminary, where we chose a couple of his works and then spent 10 minutes in Visio Divina with it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you alluded to taking in art slowly. You write on page 140 about slow art as a growing movement. You say, one of the reasons people often feel exhausted after walking through an art museum is that the average amount of time spent before a painting, which holds a freight of meaning and potential for resonance, is 15 seconds. And often it is much less than that. Within the scope of our fast-paced, internet-shaped lives, 15 seconds might seem like a long time, but it is not nearly enough time to be fully present and available for resonance and transformation. So true.
Yeah, there's a slow art value on the making side, and then there's the slow art value on the receiving side. So you have some contemporary artists like Makoto Fujimura who actually use that tagline, slow art, to describe the process of engaging with the materials and taking your time with the materials to present them a certain way. And that's really important. And then on the reception side, it's equally important. And sometimes we ignore the responsibility of the viewer to encounter the artist and what the artist has made through our own slow approach.
So I can imagine somebody must have sat in the MoMA with a timer and did an average of how many seconds does somebody engage a piece of art.
Somebody did this research project, yes. But the challenge of Slow Art Day, which is usually the last Saturday of April, is to just spend a morning at an art museum, and ideally go in with a group of friends, and you all disperse and choose 5 works to engage with that morning for 20 minutes each. And then you come back together for lunch and you talk about your experience. And I guarantee it will be more revelatory than trying to do the entire museum, is the language we use.
Sure.
I did the Mint Museum, or I did the Beckler. Maybe we're not supposed to see everything in one visit, right?
Yeah, repeat visits. So this is a day, you say, Slow Art Day. Is there a
Slow
website
Art Day
where I can learn more?
Yep, there's a website, and I assume it's still active. I haven't checked this year, but normally it's been the last Saturday of every April, and there are groups in cities around the world who are engaging in art this way.
Okay. Well, I'll go look that up, and if I can find a link, I will put that in our show notes. Maybe the collaborative should host a slow art day.
Sounds like a great idea. You have some great art there in Orlando.
Oh, here it is, slowartday.com, April 11th this year.
Oh, it's earlier this year.
Uh-huh.
That seems to, oh no, I think that's the Saturday after Easter.
Easter, right.
I was thinking it was Holy Weekend.
Yeah, Easter's really early this year.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, how do theologians sometimes misunderstand or misuse art?
I think one of the misuses is to focus too much on the message, on a sort of didacticism, of assuming that this art communicates one thing and communicates that clearly. So I think that can do a disservice to the artist who may or may not know exactly what they're trying to communicate, depending on their process and their tradition. But also in terms of what art can do, art does more in our lives than just communicate intellectual information or, propositional knowledge. It impacts us emotionally. It impacts us relationally. It impacts us on the level of our core disposition. So it limits the scope of how the art's been created, as well as the potential for what art can do in our lives today. So that would be one. And then, I think it's so easy for art to turn into propaganda, to be leveraged for some kind of ideology. And I don't think any particular group is specifically to blame for that. I think that's a human tendency to take powerful works of creativity and to leverage them for a particular niche ideology or purpose. And we just need to be very, very wary of that, no matter our tradition.
Now, when you say propaganda, my mind goes to Uncle Sam pointing his finger and I need you. Is it that explicit, or what would be some other examples of propaganda?
I think there are certain, it's easy to pick on images, but we could also think about music that, think about some particular hymns that we might love and are getting used to singing, but are they actually promoting the correct vision of reality, or is it just the one that we prefer and the one that we want to uphold? So that's what I'm talking about in terms of just solidifying what we already know or what we want to know, rather than leading us to the end of ourselves so we can counter the true mystery of God in the story that we're participating in.
I think mystery is an important word there. I'm being a Calvinist and in the Reform camp, as I believe you would call yourself. Yeah. We're so confessional. We're so worried about doctrine. And so we use lots of words and lots of words to explain other words and more words to explain those words to keep ourselves within confessional truth. But art doesn't, it's mystery. It's encounter. It isn't confessionally tight. And I can imagine that is difficult and worrisome for some traditions.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot to talk about there, because I think there can be a misunderstanding that the arts are not valued within the Reformed tradition or Calvinist traditions. And even within the Reformed tradition, there's a broad spectrum of approaches, whether historically or in the contemporary church.
Right. That's right.
But by and large, there is a preference, or there is an emphasis within this Protestant Reformed tradition on an aesthetics of the ear. So it's an emphasis on the word, an emphasis on music. And I think it's good to recognize that, because like any church that has, every church has a liturgy. Just as every church has a liturgy, so every church and every tradition has an aesthetic. So it's not if, it's what aesthetic do we have? What do we tend to privilege? What do we emphasize? And so there is a weakness in this particular tradition, I think, on the visual side of things. And there's more that we could incorporate that's for our benefit.
You're so right about that, because I, as a pastor now for 25 years and in Presbyterian churches that have had both contemporary and traditional worship, This church has not had the worship wars as I've seen and experienced in other places, and that's a wonderful blessing to this particular place. But I always kind of chuckle with myself when there's some skinny jean advocates, and I've got plenty of friends I love that wear skinny jeans, and they huff and puff and roll their eyes at traditional people and old people church. And I think, if your pastor came out in a suit and tie, you would be upset, because you're right. There is an aesthetic to every single environment.
That's right.
Recognize that it exists rather than think yours is the best.
Yes. There's a default customary aesthetic, and we need to begin with description before we can start evaluating. And I think it's easy to rush through that and not do a proper job describing what the aesthetic actually is so it can be properly evaluated.
Well, and likewise, it goes the other way, where how many wool-suited Presbyterians would turn their nose up at a church that maybe feel extremely casual or care less, and yet, no, there's a very intentional aesthetic going on here.
I think there's a lot of ecumenical potential in this conversation where we can say, okay, this is what we do really well in our tradition. Oh, but look at how they do this other thing really well in that tradition. I wonder what we could learn. I wonder what we could borrow and experiment with to engage the whole person in this experience.
I've always said that Presbyterians don't do retreats very well. The Methodists, they know how to do retreats.
Got it
now,
down.
When it comes to preaching and doctrine, love you Methodists, but we got you on that one. Wes, one of the neatest experiences of my life, and this must have been back in 98, 99 with the Promise Keepers movement. And they would fill up stadiums with men, and it was very, very encouraging and exciting to see. Well, they had a Promise Keepers clergy gathering in Atlanta at the Georgia Dome. And I knew I was going on to seminary, and so I went, and it was fascinating to walk around the inside, because you would have a Roman Catholic bishop in his full robe regalia with a little hat on next to a Pentecostal in jeans and a flannel shirt. And then you've got your Calvinists with their beards and their attractive glasses. So it was just such a mix of the kingdom and a visible evidence of the various approaches, traditions, histories, what matters to them.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have spaces where we can experience more of that. And along with our global brothers and sisters, all kinds of different cultures and languages, that's where you get the true rich aesthetic experience.
Well, so many of our listeners live in professional worlds that are often filled with pressure, compromise, or attempts at leadership and successes, but also fatigue. So what do you think Rouault could do to his art, particularly do to help and form Christians in the workplace today?
I am personally inspired by Rouault because, as we talked about a little bit about before, he created in relative anonymity, and it wasn't until much later in his life that he had shows in proper museums and was recognized in the art world. And there was an inspiring long obedience in the same direction that Rouault was able to model. And I'm not saying that was easy. If you read his journals, there was a lot of angst and wondering, like, what am I actually doing? But the community in which he was a part of was a huge part of that. So it wasn't just Rouault on his own saying, I'm going to commit to this and I'm going to be faithful. Others came alongside and encouraged and prodded him along as well. So it's that personal commitment to faithfulness in the mundane and doing the little things that lead to a life of faithfulness, along with a community that can remind you why you're there and who you are and the purpose of your daily vocation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you say he did get to know some success in his own lifetime.
There was some shows and some opportunities for Rouault to be aware of that toward the very end of his life, but most of it was after his life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, more than just Rouault's work, what would you say a person in the workplace today, how could they integrate art into their prayer lives, into their reflection on who they are and what they're made to do? Speak to the non-artists, but all creators, as you said.
Yes, we are all creative, and we can all put ourselves in a position to receive the gift of art. I think I'll just speak personally. What's been really important for me, particularly if I feel stuck, if I feel like I'm in a rut, or I just need a spark to approach a certain area of life with a little more creativity, that's where the arts can be just very practical and helpful in my life, because they'll nudge me out of that rut by through a story that I'm reading, or a poem that I'm encountering, or a song that I'm hearing. Just shifting my habits of thought and habits of imagination a little bit to consider some other possibilities. And I always find that has a greater impact if I'm able to talk about that with somebody else. So, maybe I just sat down and watched the latest Knives Out mystery, which I thought
they're so good.
It was really wonderful, but had some resonance for thinking about life and what matters, and it's that extra conversation with someone who's also seen the film that allows art to have that kind of impact in our lives.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm in an EPC church, and you mentioned you're at one there in Charlotte. We have a EPC pastors conversation chat room on Facebook, and the latest Knives Out movie, my goodness. I mean, it's so faithful in some ways. It presents faith and grace and mercy. Wow.
Yeah, it's a remarkable film for a lot of reasons. And I think for a pastor, it's a great film to watch and just consider what kind of pastor do I want to be? And not in shame, but thinking about what kind of pastor have I been? What kind of pastor do I want to be? And what might shift a little bit in my life as inspired by that film.
I looked it up, and the director and the screenplay writer, neither are people of faith.
Right. Yeah, there's some religious background there, and that certainly comes out, I think, in some of what they're wrestling with.
And it's just so amazing that they nailed it so well on some major Christian themes.
Yeah.
So someone who may not be well-versed in the arts, but yet they go, you know what? I like that Wes Vander Lugt. I want to go get this book, A Prophet in the Darkness. How, if they're not visually literate, how should they approach the book?
Yeah, this book, I tried to make it accessible in providing some personal and historical introductions, but I think it's really important as you're reading an essay to have some work up on your computer screen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's a resource in the back that gives us website for where you can access art, because if you're not used to engaging with visual art, it's difficult to kind of imagine. And often Rouault will pair works together very intentionally. So in the Miserere series, for example, plate 5, 6, and 7 are intentionally placed there because of the story that he's telling. So unless you're able to see those and see them in succession, you'll miss a little bit of what the authors are trying to communicate and what they're wrestling with.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there a surprise or something that really challenged you in one of these articles that you invited a professor to write on, but was there something that shocked you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say shocked, but I was particularly impacted by, I'm trying to find which chapter it is. 1 second here. Why can't I locate it? Oh, there it is. Chapter 4, The Healing Poetics of George Rouault. It's a fascinating contribution by Joel Klepak, who is an Orthodox Christian, capital O, Orthodox, as well as a family therapist. And he brings together this tradition of visual contemplation in the Orthodox Church with what he's trying to get his patients to see and to encounter in family systems therapy. And I would have never connected those worlds. My wife is a therapist, and I have some friends who are Orthodox. So it was challenging because both of those can be difficult to understand. What is Orthodox theology? What is family systems therapy? But he does a really good job of weaving them together, and I'm grateful for that contribution.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this work. Thank you for the work of the Leighton Ford Institute. We need more of this in our world, and I'm glad to know that you're doing it.
Such a delight to be involved in this work, for sure.
Well, and I also appreciate you taking your time today. Friends, pick up a copy of A Prophet in the Darkness, Exploring Theology in the Art of George Rouault, published by IVP Academic. I'm also going to put a number of these websites that we've discussed in our show notes, particularly the website at Ivy Press to be able to go see his art that is referred to in the book. And then slowartday.com. Sounds really interesting. Well, friends, thanks for making and also don't let me forget, Wes's website. You can learn more about his academic pursuits at wesleyvanderlugt.com, Wesley Vander, Lugt, Lugt.com. Well, friends, I do appreciate you making space for this conversation. If something sharpened your thinking or helped you find your footing, consider sharing it with a colleague, leave a review. Those little small acts carry a lot of weight and push our content even further. If you'd like to stay connected, give us your email address at wecolabor.com. We'll send you a copy of Zeitgeist, our current journal on faith, work, and culture. Many thanks to the Canaparo family for their generous support of today's episode. I'm Case Thorp, and God's blessings on you.